So, where should we start? Well, the one thing is, you are a psychotherapist.
That's right.
And a good one, I shall say.
Thank you.
And one of the things that you've kind of enlightened me, a term you've enlightened me to, is not like the nonverbal parts of our consciousness. And that's a really interesting thing to me, because I'm very much a word person. I do a lot of writing. I put a lot of emphasis on being able to communicate well. So this idea of these parts of consciousness of which you cannot touch with words, you can touch in other ways. And the ideas of like these formative experiences before we even had language is still in our consciousness, but it's in a way that is beyond our really rational mind, because the rational mind is kind of where the words live, you know. So yeah, just what's your how do you what's the ways to like get into nonverbal parts of consciousness? How do we begin touching those in your thoughts and your mind?
Sure. Yeah. Well, one I'm curious about. You know, when does one start having curiosity about it?
Yeah. Right.
Right. Like here I am, and I have this whole world of words, and then I can feel the limitations of the words. Sometimes there's limitations in the words, right? And sometimes there are moments in which we communicate things in spite of the words.
Right.
We have words that we're trying to communicate, but somehow a different message is coming across.
Yeah, that reminds me of my deep dive into body language and how, well, I think it's like something like 15% of what we say is relayed through the actual denotation or definition of the words.
Yeah.
And then like another 25 or 30% is the tone of voice. And then the rest, the majority, is body language, right? Yeah. So, you know, it's like, there's that song of like smiling faces tell lies, right? Because you can have a fake face, but the energy might be off or whatever, you know?
Right.
So,
yeah. So a lot of the information I have about what is underneath or inside or in the body language comes from my need to be in touch with my emotions. So when I set in my life, I set a goal that I wanted to be a healer. And all the while, I was looking for things that interested me. And at a certain point, I had all of this theory, all of these words that seemed to solve all of the problems. Like the words themselves I could explain the purpose for different emotions. I could explain all kinds of things, like the relationship between, like what's a belief and what are all these different things. And so I had all of this information. And yet I was incredibly depressed. And talking about things was not helping me. Literally going to somebody to try to talk it through wasn't doing it for me. And so what happened was that there was like this connection between what's beyond words and also what's the world of feelings. That can hide. All the feelings. And that way, yes, the thoughts that can hide behind the words, right? In all of the nonverbal. And so to begin to explore this question of, how do we get in touch with the nonverbal? A lot of it has to do with being able to start to identify sensation. To differentiate different kinds of sensation. That's a big part of it for me. And sensation can be from sensing when there's tightness in different areas. right? If I'm experiencing a kind of tightness in my throat as I'm speaking, or if I'm experiencing this kind of tightness in my chest, whatever it is, these different kinds of experiences denote certain kinds of emotional experiences.
Right.
And so specifically, when I am dissociated from, like when my narrative of thinking is disconnected from my feelings, or disconnected from a significant neighborhood of my consciousness, meaning that you and I right now are talking about, let's say that we get into a conversation that starts talking about intimate relationship or something like that. Say that I have in my past, I have hurt, a dissociated hurt, in somewhere in that neighborhood of intimate relationship. We start talking about it, and if I'm not willing to be in touch with that, that's still a neighborhood of me. That's still a neighborhood of me that has experience, that has energy about whatever it is that we're talking about. And I will be able to talk to you so much, but I will be like cursoring or just kind of like gliding over the experience that's underneath, which is, whatever shadow material that's there.
Yeah.
And so in a way, just in that moment, one way of going in and getting in touch with what it is that is underneath or beyond the words, is to be able to get in touch with the feelings, to be able to sense if there's an alignment between what one is identifying as what one is feeling and what one is thinking. What I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. And then aside from that, then you have the world of sensation, which is like the physical sensations that can associate with what it is that you're feeling and what it is that you're thinking.
Right.
But the power that sensation has is that it brings things into the present moment. Sensation, whatever is happening right here, right now.
Right.
And feelings, in a way, can go into all kinds of places, right? And then thoughts can go into all kinds of places. And so there's a way in which there's a connection here between, for me, there's a connection between the world of sensation that's also important to be able to be in touch with, because that's
physical sensation.
Physical sensation.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like what keeps me grounded, like a grounding cord to the present moment and what's going on right here. If I'm not in touch with that, I can be connected to all kinds of thoughts and feelings that might be in a completely different story, that is not integrated. Yeah, and so it's like being responsible for what's happening right now.
Yeah.
What's happening literally right now? Like, what is it that I'm feeling right now, and what are the sensations that are happening in my body, and how can I tell if I'm nervous, for example, or not? If I can't tell that I'm nervous, then I'm going to end up all of that stuff is going to be communicated underneath.
It's going to manifest in certain ways of communicating and relating to perhaps the other person or whatever, in ways that, if you're not aware that you're nervous, things are going to happen in communication that may not, if you were looking at it from an external perspective, you may not like to see that.
Right.
So that's interesting. So we have thought, and then we have feelings, which is more feelings versus emotions. Is that the same thing, or is that something different?
Well, the way that I like to use those words is that emotion is comprised of pairs or of thoughts and feelings. Feeling with a thought together produces that kind of that emotion. If I'm just feeling, there's a way in which, and I really do connect feelings with an experience of the feminine,
right,
and thoughts with an experience of the masculine.
Absolutely.
And there is something here about the architecture of life, that when the masculine and the feminine, any masculine and feminine, come together, that power happens, like some kind of spark happens. And that's how I relate to that word emotion.
That's beautiful. I love that. So thought is that rational part of the mind, and then you have feelings, and then where those two meet is emotions. So thoughts, emotions, feelings, and then actual physical sensation, like tightness and things like that. That's great. Yeah. And so knowing yourself is being in tune with all four of those things, right?
Sure.
And being aligned with that. So yeah. I mean, it reminds me of my perennial question, which is, how do you distinguish the difference between what is an intuition versus what is a fear? You've heard me say that so many times, right?
Sure.
Because say you're going down a path, maybe it's a physical path, or maybe it's just an intellectual path, or whatever, and you have a hesitation of wanting to go further. Is that something that is an intuition you should listen to, or is it coming from a place of irrational fear that you need to overcome, right? Do you listen to these fears, or you try to overcome these fears? That's always, I think, a big question I always ask people. And a lot of people will say, feel it in their body. They'll feel the difference in their body. This is usually women, because women, I think, are more attuned to the sensations of their body. And I had another person say that fear usually has a lot of story wrapped up into it, right? So there's just a lot of you're able to express all the reasons why and all the fears and all that. Whereas intuition is more of a spontaneous, almost ephemeral, you don't really have this story with it. It's just this more hazy kind of a thing. I don't know. That was an interesting thought.
Yeah, and so the thinking, yeah, I love this question. Yeah, and so the thinking that happens in the intuition, right, that comes through as a thought. It seems like what I'm hearing from you is that it comes together, or it becomes present, but in a much calmer way. That it doesn't have a rushed quality to it.
Yeah, you're kind of almost, the intuition almost has an attachment to it in a certain sense.
Right.
Whereas fear, you're very attached. You're like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, yeah, because with fear, what you were describing about there's a lot of story. For me, when I have a lot of story around fear, something that I'm afraid of, usually it's that I'm not allowing myself. So I'm not allowing myself to really identify what it is that's actually scary. So, to put it in other words, fears, for me, there are few things that are actually really scary.
Right.
And what I notice is that when I don't allow myself to recognize that I'm afraid of something, what happens is that it creates this kind of cloud of a kind of anxiety that I end up then having those kinds of stories, like that if I am scared of being abandoned,
sure,
right, but I don't acknowledge it, then I end up living up here, and then I end up, if I don't deal with it, I'll start to become afraid of things that are associated with abandonment.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So an example I could use for myself is I have a problem with water. Like being in bodies of water scares me. Partly because even though I took swimming lessons, that didn't really stick. But perhaps that fear, almost to an irrational fear of being in a body of water, the root of that, a root fear, core fear, would be fear of loss of control, or even fear of death, right?
Sure.
So those are some foundational fears, and then by not addressing that, it manifests as in this avoidance of water. So that's kind of an interesting thought. Yeah.
And Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so now, it's like why the question of how to identify the difference between a fear and an intuition.
Right.
Usually, I would imagine that question is posed because I want to be able to tell what's useful. Like to be able to tell apart which one to listen to and which one to barge through.
Right.
Now, in speaking about like this particular example, right? If you actually get in touch with the fear that is more real, meaning that if the fear has become like a fear of water and there's a perfectly reasonably safe place where you have whatever resources that you need to be able to go inside.
To be safe, right?
Yeah, to be safe.
You got floaties,
whatever
no
it is.
rapids, your feet can touch the bottom.
That's right. That's right. These different things that you would need being a person who doesn't have confidence.
Yeah.
That you can do it without being able to touch the ground or whatever it is. Yeah. And so, but let's say that you have all of that there. And so you go and you see the water and you have all of this fear. Yeah. We kind of like talk about it, and we were able to talk through all of the reasons, and you're able to like reduce the noise of, oh well, I was afraid of that, but I'm not anymore because we talked about that, and that makes sense that we have a floaty or whatever it is, right? But what does shore up as you kind of like crop up, it's kind of like weeding other fears. It's kind of like this big fear that I don't deal with, and then it comes up as all of these other ones, and we have to deal with all of these other ones. Yeah. Now I think that we don't have to deal with all of these other ones if we come and we deal with a central one. If we do that, because this is where all the energy is coming from. Right. If we deal with this one, then all of these lose steam and they suddenly like become like an illusion. Yeah. That suddenly.
It's like whack-a-mole.
No, exactly. And so my experience is that when I get in touch with what I'm actually afraid of, there's intelligence there that tells me about something that really matters to me. Right. Something that is at stake, something that is being threatened, or something that's in jeopardy. I want to know that. Like when it's actually in touch with the peace. Right? That it's not the fluff of the anxious fear, right? That it's kind of like the one that I want to cut through, right? That fear that's more real, in some ways, is just as valuable or even more valuable than the intuition.
Oh, interesting. Because it shows you what's important in life.
Oh my God, in the moment, you're so in touch with it.
That's really interesting to honor the wisdom in fears, as to not necessarily that you need to oblige that fear, but rather it shows you what is important to you. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And so to me that's the piece about like if we and we can identify, for example, if fears are not real in that way, that they're more. I had a teacher once, these kind of corny acronyms. False evidence appearing real.
Fear. Nice.
But if you actually start investigating and it does actually start to play the whack-a-mole game, then you know. Then you know. I mean that's a way in which you can test it. Right. Now, with anxiety, right? Like when fear is running like that, there's a lot of story. There's a lot of like thoughts that are happening. Part of what needs to happen is that it needs to be digested. So rarely would I say, if ever, does that actually become digested through thinking about it. Right. Like what actually happens is that the relationship suddenly transforms. Meaning you're never going to get rid of a fear if it's of water or of whatever it is, if you don't go and actually start having a relationship with the water. Right? Like even if you you could start having a really intimate relationship with the water in your imagination. You can imagine swimming, right?
Like, and that's where it starts. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but to be able to go there and start to touch it, and to sense, oh, hold on a second, like, where is this actually coming from? And often it's actually relationship that's necessary. That's my experience. The things that really scare me. Like, there's moments, for example, when I was in graduate school, not just in graduate school, throughout my education journey, from probably like around fourth grade, the amount of anxiety and the fear, panic attacks that I would experience with dealing with essays, right?
Okay, yeah.
And what I didn't know how to do when I was a kid was, and even up into grad school, I didn't know how to be able to stay with what I was actually afraid of. And I was continuously living in this anxiety, procrastination dynamic.
Yeah.
In relationship to writing papers. Now, part of what it is that I needed was I needed to co-regulate. And it's this, and it's this term that you're probably familiar with. I needed another nervous system to help me learn how to digest what it is that seemed impossible to me.
Another human.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be human. Some people are like very soothed by their dogs or their cats.
So what did that look like for you?
Well, for me, it's looked many times. Well, just having a friend or somebody close to me that sits with me and helps me really ground the first steps of whatever writing process that I'm going to go into. I just need somebody to help me like pin down a place that I'm going to start. And just, there's some kinks. There's like some places where the fear kind of like floods in. Now, if I look at it more in depth, the writing the essay, I mean, I can tell you that eventually, through all the repetition that I experienced, it was not writing essays that I was afraid of. The actual writing process, I actually enjoy. And the turning it in and everything is fine. What I didn't enjoy was the cementing a starting point or cementing a process where I was making a choice and I was going to say, this is what it is that I'm going to write about, and to start and to just to commit to it. There's a level of intimacy there that part of what it is that it was touching in me was that I was having an opportunity to come out into the world and put out my voice based on what it is that I'm interested in. Right? I wasn't at school. I went to a school that was quite open in this regard. I was told, really write about what it is that's interesting to you. And that scared me much more than being told what to write about. Like, if I was told exactly what to do, I wasn't afraid of doing it. But the experience of being given the freedom terrified me. And part of what it is that it's connected to was that in my past, I had an association where I ended up realizing that there was impermanence in the most important relationships of my life. My parents divorced when I was 4. And in the process of digesting the loss and all of this, I mean, my parents fought, all kinds of chaos that was breaking the sense of trust of the love. I tried to find a way to control the experience. I tried to find a way to try to prevent the negative experience from happening. And one of the main ways that I tried to do that was by saying, if I completely eradicate my own instincts, my own desires, my own needs, I will diminish the likelihood that I'm going to be a burden.
Oh, sure, yeah.
In my family.
Yeah.
Right? I just don't have any needs. And it's like my family like chills out.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm like, and I'm doing this and doing just like everything.
Yeah.
Suddenly it like builds this tension and stress.
Right.
I need to do this, and look, Adrian over there is like, whatever. And I learned from very early on that I could just shut down.
Yeah.
And that somehow made some kind of peace.
Right. Not having needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Or ignoring your needs.
Moving forward right into my life.
Yeah.
People are like, Adrian, this is your education. This is your opportunity to find your voice.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an opportunity. I want you to pick whatever it is that you want.
Yeah, what you want and what you need is right.
Yeah,
it's
very connected.
Yeah, it's very connected.
Very connected.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic, of course, wants versus needs.
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah. And so I ended up. There were kinks, moments there, where there was a fear. That was undigested.
Mm-hmm.
That I was going to risk breaking something important.
Wow.
By taking away my attention from, focusing on everybody, everything around me, tuning inside, and then bringing out whatever it is that was inside me, and that in that blindness, I was going to break something. And so now through that process, right, I'm trying to sit down and write, and I can't. I try to sit down and I can't. And then what happens, right? If I'm by myself, oh my God, what would happen is that I would stay up till the wee hours of the morning and start writing at 2 a.m. At the last day, and that I could like squeeze the writing through that state of incredible sleep deprivation, and it's almost like being drugged.
Right.
Like how it's easier to
trans.
When you're wherever it is that you are, you can have more confidence if you get drunk. Right. Very similar.
Your resistance has been
And so that's part of what I discovered, that I if I had somebody close to me that could stay with me and verify that nothing was going to break, then I could start writing.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really great.
Yeah. Now, through that process of like recognizing that nothing's going to break, that's the equivalent of going out into the water with a friend and saying, and just little by little, there's no rush. We're not going to go into the water.
So this is, I was recently having a conversation about, in terms of parenting children, exposure therapy, right? Of like, let's say a kid has challenges with social situations, right? You have two different camps in parenting advice. One is just expose them to the thing that's causing challenges and they'll get used to it. And then the other camp might be, well, that could be really traumatizing and you're not honoring their feelings and what they're expressing to you, and they're just going to just suppress it, whatever. So it's kind of, but really, I think as with most truths, there's the middle way. What is the middle way? And I was having this conversation. And it was like, if it's just like an all day social event, that could be really traumatizing to a sensitive kid, for example. But if it's just like a 1 hour thing, and it starts off like maybe every other day you have this 1 hour social thing, then these little, there's little, what would you call them? Little touches allows the kid to become more resilient as opposed to just overwhelming another system. I think that probably applies to adults too, right? Of this idea of exposing yourself to a little bit of stress, but not too much to break the system. What is that called? Hormesis, I think.
I've never heard that word.
Yeah, it's some term like that where it's like fasting, right? Or it's like cold plunges. It's like these are positive stresses on the body that make the body more resilient.
Nice.
But obviously you can also take fasting too far and then starve yourself, or you could take cold plunges too far and have hypothermia. So you gotta find the balance.
Yeah.
It's that middle way.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking about when it comes to like overcoming these fears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you also mentioned that this idea of how other people in our life are so important for our evolution,
Mm-hmm.
because people are mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
We see ourselves and we evolve ourselves through our interaction and relationship with other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, the eye cannot see itself without a mirror, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I've just been thinking about how
Yeah.
a lot of my friendships and relationships, they're just constantly evolving me because of the mirrors that other people are. So, yeah.
Yeah. My goodness. I want to go back to this piece that where we started about um,
Nonverbal.
nonverbal
Right.
communication.
Yeah.
There's something here about so much of that mirroring
Mm-hmm.
that happens that you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
is nonverbal.
Right. There's the mirror neurons in our brain.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's an actual term for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where we match body language with people that we have rapport with, and then
Mm-hmm.
that just creates this mutual rapport.
Mm-hmm.
It's and once again, that's being attuned to the body language and the communications that's being transferred there. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think your part of your question was, like what are entryways into the nonverbal?
Yeah, how do you
right?
touch the
How do you
nonverbal
touch?
realm, especially the nonverbal programming, right?
Right.
The
Right.
I should say the pre-verbal programming, before we had words to understand our reality, before we could say that is a tree,
Right.
we observed it for what it actually was. You know, before we even had the term for what mom is, and all the
Right.
attachments to what mom is, both
Yeah.
in the collective and individually,
Yeah.
there was an understanding of what mom is before there was even the word for it. It's like, the other way you could look at it is words are, in effect, gestalts, right? Where a gestalt is like this
memories of gestalts.
this thing that represents the parts, in a sense. The gestalt as a whole, that's a deep topic, but it's like the symbol and the notion and the word of a tree is a gestalt for branches, greenness, things that are rooted in the ground, pretty big, shakes in the wind, has a certain kind of smell to it, sometimes gives fruits and nuts and sometimes doesn't, right? All these different things, we don't think about that when we think about tree.
Right.
We're not parsing that out, and so that is my understanding kind of what a gestalt is. So you could almost look at pre-verbal as pre-gestalt, even pre-formation of gestalts.
That's interesting.
Kind of an interesting thought, right?
Yeah.
Because what are words but symbols, right?
Yeah.
And so and what are symbols but gestalts? And so, anyways, it's very So how do we touch that? It's an interesting thought. I mean, one of the things that you've mentioned is this play therapy or this playback theater or those kind of things. Art therapy, another probably way to start touching that.
Sure. My sense is that one of the main ways is through intimate relationship. Through, and I mean just being close with somebody else, even intellectually, and to whatever degree, if you're able to be close with somebody else, specifically, who is aware of, and so this is part of where I was going where I was going with when I was talking about feelings and body sensations. To be able to access in my experience, to be able to access the pre-verbal or the non-verbal, there's the need to be able to be in touch in the moment with sensations and with feelings.
You know what that reminds me of, as you say that, is a lot of people, when they experience, say, massage, with a particularly intuitive massage person, sometimes when a certain part is touched, they will have an emotional release, or they'll have a vision come up, a memory that they have long since forgotten.
Yeah.
That's kind of an interesting. I mean, that's talk about how sensations are attached to certain truths.
Yeah. In that way, I think that the body itself is a portal.
Mm-hmm.
It's a portal to the nonverbal, to the preverbal. So it's a place where experience, where the like in the like architectural design of very specific shapes, body shapes. Yeah, that there is psychological like association in the forms. They're like clusters, neighborhoods of experience, of emotional experience, almost like gestalts of experience, of but these kind of neighborhoods where the very specific types of movements of like openness or closing or whatever it is, and so my I guess it's kind of silly, but by definition, if it's preverbal or nonverbal, that it might be hard, and it's not impossible, I don't think, but it might be hard to be able to access the nonverbal inside words. You can do that.
Oh, sure, yeah, right.
You can with different kinds of associations.
Right.
But the body is something, as you said, that is talking all the time. And so if we can have an intimate relationship where we can be close and alive, and we can help each other essentially notice when one of us is tense, or when one of us seems to be feeling something.
Yeah.
Like he's different, or when one seems to be like really relaxed. And it's that kind of information that we give to each other, right, in the nonverbal, and if we're able to sense them and put them into words, we help each other bring nonverbal out into the verbal, into the conscious.
A couple things I'm thinking about. I mean, one I'm thinking about is there was a test of, or a study where they told some students to cross their arms during a lecture, and other students to keep their arms uncrossed, and they found that students who had their arms crossed retained less information. So the mind follows the body, and the body follows the mind.
Sure.
But the other thing I'm thinking about too is, there's a theory of multiple intelligences, right? So there's, of course, what we often think of intelligence being the intellectual, more academic thing. But then there's obviously emotional intelligence. There's
kinesthetic.
There's a kinesthetic. There's even like just having an intelligence about sound, even.
Sure. Or
spatial, right? So then I'm thinking of certain kind of people who are very they're very body oriented people, right? Maybe they go to the gym a lot, or maybe they're just very much in the physical realm of their body, and they have really beautiful bodies, because they're working on it, and they're doing the exercises, and they're super active. But are these people more in touch with the nonverbal world than other people who maybe are less into that? And maybe they are.
That's interesting.
And if they don't seem to have necessarily a greater advantage over others, then how can we use and interact with our bodies in a way that is more intentional at touching the non or pre-verbal parts of consciousness? And you know what it might be? It might just be the difference is intention, right? Because if you're living in the physical world and you are really embodied and you're like working on your body, but you don't have the intention to access certain parts, well then it's not going to happen. It's like certain people. I mean, in my case, I will not remember my dreams usually unless I tell myself that I'm going to remember my dream the previous night. That intention changes the situation. So
absolutely,
I think it's all about intention, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. Yeah, there's people. Well, case in point, I think I used to aspire to be a very successful tennis player.
Right. Right.
And eventually I realized that that wasn't what I was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up becoming very interested in healing.
Mm-hmm.
As I became interested in healing, I realized what a people person I am.
Mm-hmm.
And how interested I am in people and the nuances and in deep relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I love deep relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And as I grew out of tennis, I would go back and I would still feel the love, and I would watch the interviews
Mm-hmm.
of the tennis players is when they won this or lost this or talking about their lives, being interviewed. And the great majority of tennis players do not have a great capacity to relate, like emotionally.
Yeah.
The capacity to communicate and to feel and to
Yeah.
be present.
Yeah.
There's this very common one-track mind that is thinking about improving the stroke or the tactic or the whatever.
Right.
And I'm not saying that there's not a lot of intelligence there.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of, but there are some tennis players that have a lot of emotional intelligence in this case, right? Of this kind of example.
Yeah.
And some that do not. There's some people that grow psychologically tremendous amounts, and some people who basically stay the same person, and they, their depth in terms of their psychological.
Well, that reminds me of another thing.
Yeah.
Another little tidbit of wisdom I got from another person. His name was Titus, and he talked about how if you're, say, dieting and wanting to lose weight, or say you're exercising and you want to lose weight, if you're doing it because you're upset with your body and you're not happy with your body and you're like, stupid body, I just want to lose weight, then the exercise is poisonous. Whereas if you have a good relationship with your body, and you're like, I honor my body, I want my body to be in the best shape because I love it. Then the exercise is actually medicine. Same thing with the diet, same thing with any kind of thing when we're trying to make an improvement. It's a lot of times like, I know a lot of health nuts where they have such a negative relationship with food, and they eat really healthy, and but they are, first of all, they're not happy, and they're not doing as well as other people who have a more positive relationship with food, though they may not be eating as well, right? Now, granted, right.
There you're changing the definition of what it means to eat well.
Right. But like, what if the relationship with your food is almost, well, maybe I won't say more important, but maybe it's as important as like what you're actually eating. That reminds me of another thing of like, a lot of times in my circle of people, there's some individuals who they have just kind of an edge to them. They have an aggressiveness to them, and so they'll I'll say something and then they'll be like, we'll just try to bat it down or whatever, or just or dismissive. What they're saying is valid criticism and it's valid feedback, but a lot of times it's how they're saying it, right? So it's not, and that's what I remind people like that all the time, or people who are really being really edgy. It's like, it's not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. So anyways,
well, they're being encountered with a person who is, because how could you tell?
Well, sometimes it takes time. It takes weeks or months to sometimes say, oh, I see what's happening here.
But how would you say that you tell?
Feeling. Right?
How you feel generally when you're with the person.
Feeling, yeah. Absolutely. That's a really good point. I mean, actually, right? It first starts out as sensation. Physical sensation. You feel physically repelled. You feel like, if you feel almost like you want to be in defensiveness mode.
You find yourself talking defensively when you were expecting to be friendly.
I don't need to be defensive, but I feel like I want to be.
I live in this beautiful place.
Right. and then you get into the feelings realm, and then you get into the emotions realm, and then finally you find the words for it. That's a great example. Yeah. And you know what? Another example is, Stephen Buhner talks about a lot about the invisibles in life.
Mm.
And one of the examples he often uses is when you walk into a restaurant, you immediately have a sense
Mm.
whether you like it or not.
Mm.
Instantly.
Mm.
It's a gestalt.
Mm.
It's an instant gestalt.
Mm. Mm.
And you may not immediately be able to parse like it smells weird or I don't like the people in here or it's too bright, not enough ambiance or whatever, or just you don't like the wait staff or whatever, but you have a feeling.
Yeah.
And then that feeling, eventually you start to meld it with intellect, so it becomes emotions. And then eventually it becomes words where you're like, hey, I don't like this place because of this reason. That's interesting to,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's soothing to me to imagine. Yeah, exploring. I tend to, given that I'm a psychotherapist and that I care, the way that I care about relationships and people and everything, I tend to not be put off by things very easily.
Right.
If that makes sense.
You've been exposed to a lot of different things.
Yeah. And but there's a muscle that you're talking about that I think that I feel like I want to exercise a little more.
Yeah.
This piece about allowing myself to have the experience of yes or no from that first moment.
Yeah.
There's some kind of, and I like the breadth of it. Like the breadth of the yes or the no, meaning that whatever this kind of like invisible, because this is what is it? What was Stephen Buter?
Well, there's an actual term for it, but
yeah,
one term for it is in the invisibles of life.
Yeah. So there's something about, well, to me, I experience a kind of relief whenever it is that I realize that the conclusions that I'm coming to in my life are coming with information from multiple sources.
Yeah.
That it is not this authoritarian thought
that
is coming in and bulldozing through the experience, but that there's a coherence between the different parts.
Right.
Which brings us back to the nonverbal. Being able to be in touch with whatever it is that's nonverbal. There's something here about whenever it is that thinking and feeling, well, this connects to so many traditions, but for example, in Vipassana meditation and that kind of tradition of being able to support the existence of equanimity and the reduction of suffering in the world by reducing reactivity. Right? That's like a main piece that I left with from
responsibility.
Yeah, the sense, and there's something there about, well, that the technique in Vipassana has to do with being able to be in connection with sensation in the moment, right? Which brings you to the present moment, and to be able to be aware of any feelings or thoughts that come to you without reacting to them. The practice is to be able to stay in touch with the moment through the sensation, whether it's of your breathing or there's at different stages it's different. But there's something there that the moment that we're aligned, where we're able to be with what it is that we feel and what it is that we think and what it is that we sense in the moment, it's this powerful funnel of life where we can be in touch with life with more coherence. Right? If we're online with all of those pieces, it's almost like we can align to each other in more nuanced ways. Versus if you and I are sitting here and our relationship is just functioning based on some thought pattern that is dissociated from what it is that we're feeling, the sustainability of this moment is going to be much less. It's kind of like if you didn't notice that you were thirsty, and right, like I'm thinking right now about what it is that I'm saying. I saw you drink, and you had some awareness somehow of what was going on, and now I have awareness of what's going on in my. And if I didn't do that, and I kept on talking for an hour, I'd probably have a sore throat tomorrow.
Or was that mirror neurons?
Or was that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, meditation, the power of meditation. I mean, it's almost trite about focusing on breath and the importance of meditation in life.
Yeah.
You know, all the most profound things in life sound trite. And then that's why we have to write long, verbose books about things, because we don't believe the sentence. You know, it's like for example, like the power of now. Well, the power of now says it all.
Yeah.
There is a potency and power in the present moment.
Yeah.
But see, that's not enough. So now we gotta write a whole book about the power of now, so we can explain it. You know.
Yeah.
Or we are all one. Or like love is the foundational energy of everything. It's like these things, you know, sound trite. So, you know, we have to use metaphor and story to cement it. But like one thing I'm thinking about with regards to meditation is when I take sabbaticals, meaning I disconnect from technology, I disconnect from all the different distractions in life, and focus on things, very singular topics that enrich me, that are for me. I enter a state of ultra coherence, and it feels like what I call the radio station of Joe becomes much more clear. And then what happens is, when I reach out to people after that week of a sabbatical, an uncanny amount of people are like, I dreamed about you, or you just popped in my mind, or people I haven't heard of for a long time will reach out to me, because like they can almost feel the clarity that I am transmitting into the field. So, anyways, a sabbatical is, what is meditation? What's the definition of meditation? Because a lot of times, exactly that, we're just being aware of the thoughts, like clouds. They come and go, and you have no attachment to them, and you feel the sensations, and you're focusing on breath. But I think meditation is something that is broader than that even. And what I think it is meditation is singular focus. It's a focused attention, right? And I believe that attention is the most valuable thing we have in life. It's a currency, and it's more. You know, a lot of times we might say that time is the most valuable thing in life. But what is time without attention, right? You could have 100 years, but if you have zero attention, and there's no quality of attention in those 100 years, then 1 year of super focused attention will be more valuable than that. So I believe attention is really important. So anyways, our attention is distracted in our modern world by so many different things. Literally, it's being sold. It's being extracted. To reference John Trudell, the Native American activist, you know, they're mining our minds. I love that term, because, you know, the industrialists, however you want to call them, you know, have been extracting the natural world and the forests and the land and the waters and the animals and all. It's over extraction of the resources of the world. Well, now they're extracting the resources of human attention. So anyways, meditation is a coherence of attention. So that can be in the form of vipassana. It can also, I had a dream. I don't know if you were there when I was expressing it to our friend Jesse, but he came to me in my dream, and he said to me, I had a teacher show me that if I balance for this long period of time, I reach a state of ecstasy, basically. And I thought about that after I dreamed about it, and it was like, by being in a literally physically balanced state, like on a balance beam or a balance ball or on one leg or whatever, you force yourself into a state of focused attention. It's a great way to meditate for people who might have more of a monkey mind, you know. Certainly going for walks brings me to that attention state. Yeah, like I think also being in the improvisational music flow is you're not thinking about random things, you know, you're in that flow. And the flow state itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is often referenced, the flow state, that is a state of meditation ultimately.
Yeah.
And that can happen like in play. And what is play? But just unstructured time where you're not really trying to like get at anything. You're not trying to be productive, You're not trying to accomplish anything.
Right. You're
Yeah.
trying to feel and to tickle and to create, to play, to touch and to push and to discover.
Yeah.
As a result, and to discover self.
Check this. I think we're good. Yeah, we're still good. Still making sure my battery's still good.
Sure.
Oh man. Yeah, I made that too small for myself.
Yeah.
This is all relevant. All these topics all interweave. And so one of the things that you've talked about is when a person's pain is not their own, meaning it was given to them by either their parents or maybe by a lover or whatever, then for as long as they don't realize that, for as long as they're not aware of the actual true origin of that pain, they will not actually be able to do anything to resolve that pain.
That's my experience, yeah.
Yeah, and I really like that, because how many of the things are these, quote, shall we say, quote, demons that so many people have, actually don't come from them. They don't come from them. They come from, it was given to them by somebody else.
Absolutely.
Somebody else gave them this responsibility, For example, your thing of like not being attuned to your needs and wants because of how that would potentially disrupt the peace.
Yeah.
Was a responsibility that you took, but it was not necessarily maybe yours, right?
Right.
And it reminds me of certain like health crises where people will have health problems and they do everything, they can't resolve it. But if they have root canals, then which is basically a source of really toxic poisons coming from the anaerobic bacteria in root canals, then it's going to be a constant source of toxins in the body that whatever you do is not going to resolve the situation until you extract the rotten tooth. And so it's kind of like that with emotional things too. It's like, so it's like, I guess how to further that kind of conversation is like, how can a person differentiate what is theirs and what's not theirs? And to add more context to that, what was it? The idea of one of my problems that I've had in my life is I don't want to cause other people pain. And so that not wanting to cause other people pain can be a certain paralysis when it comes to certain things, right? Where I'm like, okay, well, I'm just not going to engage in this way or whatever because it might cause pain. Then,
this is like the fear example.
Yeah.
Right, that if you don't deal with the main fear, then you can start to stop yourself from engaging in all kinds of things.
Yeah. But also, the thing is, the pain that I might very well cause in the other person might be, as you said, pre-existing.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So it's like
absolutely.
You think you might be like, oh my God, I offended that person, but actually you might just be touching a pre-existing pain.
Yeah. And
that, so of course, also when you take responsibility to be kind and empathetic, of course, and to try not to cause pain, of course.
Sure.
In the name of honesty, we can also be tactful, not just be mean,
Right.
Once again, the middle way. So
yeah, that's.
Anyways, I feel like that's kind of relevant to the conversation of like origins, pain origins. And
yeah, there's pain origins. Yeah, the emotion that I associate the most with this dynamic of carrying somebody else's experience and trying to resolve it is shame.
Yeah.
And,
shame. Oh.
And so it can be a shaming experience to carry somebody else's pain and try to resolve it. Now, what do I mean by that? What I basically mean is that when there is an ow happening somewhere,
Yeah.
there is information that is essential wherever it is that ow happened that tells you how to take care of it, how to protect against it, right? But if that ow echoes and then suddenly goes into some other person's body who's never experienced the ow, they're gonna have an echo of an ow.
Yeah.
And they're gonna go out and they're gonna try to fix it and try to take care of it, right? But they're not. If it's not theirs, if it's really not theirs, because it didn't actually happen to them, then they're gonna. It's the same kind of thing where it's going to, no matter what you do, like some of the symptoms that I've experienced in relationship to this is, now this is not the case with everything. Yeah, these are not qualities that you can use to say that anytime that this is happening, it means this. But one of the qualities to look out for is a feeling that no matter how many times you express it, it always kind of like grows back. Like that you thought that you went through it. You grieved it. You went through it, and somehow it never ends. Then you have to start looking at, wait, hold on a second. What's going on here? Why am I feeling so much pain around this? So there's a sense of being able to be curious, right? About whatever it is that's there.
Yeah. And when it comes to these kind of conversations, I always like to use examples, right?
Great.
Because
Great.
A lot of times, philosophical things can stay up here, but then examples and metaphor and story bring it back in.
Excellent.
And so when you talk about shame, and that's a whole tangent, because you also, as you said, good shame or beneficial shame, and toxic positive shame and negative shame. Yeah. Positive shame being remorse for something that is that you did that was probably not good, for example, saying sorry is an example, truly apologizing authentically. But when I think about shame, I also think about, well, when we were talking about fear, I was thinking about what's one of the most common fears: public speaking for most people, and it's known as like, that was kind of an interesting example as I was thinking about that. But when we talk about shame, I'm thinking about what's a common shame in our society, and that is there's a shame around bodies, and there's a shame around sexuality, and this shame usually comes from something that is not from us, not from our direct experience, but rather it was given to us by the overculture of either the family or just the overculture of our country. Right. And so, as we discuss this idea of like shame in relationship to external pain origins that or pain origins that are not your responsibility, I think the idea of body shame and sexual shame is a fun way to kind of like play with that idea. Sure.
Yeah, I like what you're saying. When I hear, and please just know that all these examples that I'm giving and everything, they're things that I have experienced, that I find useful, and they may or may not be useful to whomever. But this piece of responsibility. So first is the responsibility. Any kind of attempt at responsibility, right, can be differentiated between what it is that a person can be responsible for versus things that a person cannot be responsible for.
Right, like circle of influence versus circle of concern is different. Right.
Yeah. And so now, if a person is constantly given a responsibility, such as it's your responsibility to make sure that your parents are happy, right? Nobody can, in fact, make sure that anybody is happy.
Right. Right.
So that's an example of a responsibility that carries with it that kind of friction.
Yeah.
Where no matter how many times you try, right?
Yeah.
If you really believe that that's what you're supposed to be doing and that's part of an essential part of who you are, you're going to end up failing and thinking that you should be able to learn and then just encountering more and more failure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you keep on accepting in that in that relationship that it's still your responsibility, even though you've tried for 10 years and you weren't able to solve it, and you still think negative shame starts to fester, which are all of the symptomologies of poisonous shame, which are dehumanizing rules, such as you cannot make mistakes, right, or you are not forgivable.
Yeah.
Or your needs don't matter.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
Or your wants, right? These very specific kinds of rules that say that make a person not feel, not be human, right? Not have needs, not be able to take risks and make mistakes, etc. So when a person starts to take in the negative shame in that sense, right? That's a responsibility that they're taking that is essentially, in other words, not theirs. Right? You can't have a child suddenly start to be an engineer, right? Or whatever it is. You force somebody to try to do something, to make sure that they do something, but they can't, and it's going to dehumanize them. Yeah? So now on the positive side is giving somebody a responsibility that they can be responsible for. Right? And it's kind of including negative experiences, including, hey, you hurt me. I tell you that you hurt me,
right,
or you did this, or whatever it is. And if you can digest, meaning if you have those positive humanizing rules that you can make mistakes and you can, come back from it, you can learn about it,
right,
that you're forgivable, that your needs do matter in this relationship, that you don't have to suddenly clamp down and be like, I don't have any needs. Or these kinds of things. You can come back and you can learn and say, and you can actually rely on sorrow. You can rely on a sense of like, wow, that makes me really sad that happened, or that loss happened, or that whatever it is, that makes me really sad, and that motivates me. That sadness of the loss, of the pain, or whatever it is, motivates me to do better. Now, if at any point the particular responsibility that we're talking about you cannot be responsible for, the system falters, because you can feel sad as much as you want and be motivated to try to do it, and you'll never be able to do it.
Say that last part again.
So if you, in fact, at any part of this system where you have these positive rules, right, that you can make mistakes, etc. If I give you a responsibility and you really take it on, something that's not yours, you're going to fail and fail and fail and fail. It's going to wear on you. Right. Because you're going to face a responsibility that really matters to you, and you really are recognizing that you are failing in a way where you're not being able to learn, where you're not able to repair the relationship. You're not able to, whatever it is. Yeah. So there you have negative and positive shame, both different ways of digesting responsibility.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so now, I'm describing this to be able to differentiate. How do we identify when something is ours and when something is not ours? Right? And it's like, if something's not mine, well, let me really look at it. Let me look at this particular responsibility, which is, for example, an emotion. Like you're saying, how do we know if this pain is mine or not mine? Right. An emotion is a responsibility. An emotion is...
Emotion is responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an ability to respond as well, all right?
Yeah. And so I tune into the pain. I feel the ow. And yet, I can't find the ground for it. Now, I may not be able to find the ground for it, meaning I don't have the reason. I still, it hurts too, as an example, in an intimate relationship, you come close.
Yeah.
And it hurts to come close. There's a level of closeness that hurts, or that's terrifying, right? If that particular responsibility was actually drilled into you, it was through osmosis taught into you.
Yeah.
Then there's going to be no solution. Your partner is going to come this way and that way and try to like come really soft and everything, and no level of adaptation is going to dispel the fear. Because the fear, the reason why the fear is there is actually based on, like in the system, is that I'm trying, this is what's most usually happening, is that I'm carrying a pain, or in my life, I carried helplessness that was not mine. And the helplessness was my mother's helplessness. And very likely it was her, her mother's helplessness, and from wherever.
Yeah.
But this is a very kind of like basic, kind of emotion that permeated a lot of experiences, a lot of anxiety. Underneath there was a flavor of helplessness around the ways of taking responsibility for all kinds of things. Meaning moments in which my brother and I took too long to brush our teeth in the morning, to get into the car, to go to school, and she would yell at us because of the helplessness that it made her feel. Right? That we're kids. But it would make her feel this helplessness that she did not know how to deal with.
Yeah.
And so what is it that she did? She yelled at us.
Yeah.
She raged at us in the car.
Yeah.
Transmitting the helplessness. Making us feel helpless in the moment.
Yeah, so that's
and associating it with not brushing your teeth enough.
Right, and that pattern of things such as not brushing your teeth fast enough, right?
Sure.
And how that can relate to feeling a resistance towards intimacy, right? Is both a real and incredible transformation of that experience. You know what I mean? Like, who would have thought that those experiences like that in the formative years could relate to a resistance to intimacy, right? Or perhaps an ambivalence or something like that.
Sure. Well, very specifically, if I keep on, for example, carrying this, for example, in relationship to helplessness in my case, that's a feeling that is very easy for me to spawn in me. It can be, you can, when you're relating to challenges in your life, there's different kinds of feelings that you can experience when it's it's an intense challenge. And some people are, it's like easier to feel afraid, or it's easier to go into anger.
Totally.
It's easier for me to go into helplessness based on this particular practice. This.
So for people who have anger issues, what do you speculate would cause like the anger in them, as opposed to, for example, your more default to say helplessness, or as opposed to another person who might have more of a fear withdrawal response? Like, I'm curious how, obviously you have certain natural inherent personalities that have certain tendencies, and you have genetics, but certainly I feel like certain formative experiences tend to create certain responses in people. Well, every emotion, again, is a responsibility. And so in the case of the helplessness in the story with my mother, the helplessness was something that was not spoken about. It was something that was felt, but we could not talk about it. And we could make each other feel it if we yelled at each other. Right? And so that I'm talking about nonverbal. Right.
Yeah. And so now when thinking about anger, it could be many things. It's what is the responsibility that or the neighborhood of life responsibility that the person or persons are not capable of being responsible for.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'm thinking about is, I'm focusing on like what are the examples, but actually it's beyond examples, and what I feel like it is a child is they're absorbing the world through osmosis. They are just this open channel of everything,
learning everything,
and I believe, babies, especially babies, are genius, but they don't have the words to express their geniusness, right? But like, what I mean by that is, they are attuned to all the thoughts and emotions of their caregivers, and they are absorbing that, and they are reading. This is how I'm supposed to react to the environment and to the world. So, and it's not even necessarily even what the parents say or do. That's part of it, but it's also what is the essence within their parents, because that's being imparted osmotically. And like Stephen Buhner in his book Becoming Vegetalista talked about the story of how his mother didn't want him, and his mother was shamed for being pregnant at such a young age and being not married and things like that. And he, as a fetus, could feel his mother's shame about having him. And so, what would that? And see, that's not even a visceral experience. Talk about non-tangible. That's just a imparting of an essence, feeling. How he had to. It took him. Yeah, he had a. So he had this feeling of being unwanted and trying to minimize himself in order to not cause pain. And anyways, like, yeah. So that's just an example of that nonverbal, pre-verbal experience.
Yeah.
And
I like to associate descriptions like this one of Stephen Buhner as movement and as shape.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, because it's not even an experience, right?
It can't be named in the moment, obviously. Yeah. But it's there's definitely a shape that is happening. Right. There's definitely like a movement. There's certainly there's probably changes in the chemistry that's going through the umbilical cord.
Right.
You think that the emotions that are happening, right? That when the mother is thinking about the child and it's like, I don't want you.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of an example, another scientific study. I love scientific studies. And what they found, this is about how the experience of the parents passes on to the offspring.
Like transgenerational.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And what they did is they exposed rats to a shock while having them smell a certain substance. And what they found was the pups, the offspring, were born with more olfactory receptors for that smell that caused their parents pain. So in other words, the offspring became more sensitive to the stimulus of pain that their parents had.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, fascinating.
Yeah.
And that just goes to show like how rapidly evolution can happen, right?
Yeah.
Like one generation, you now suddenly have new sensitivities or whatever, or also resistances.
Yeah.
It's truly incredible.
Wow.
Yeah.
And talk about I think you're bringing it back to this piece about how to identify when something's yours or not yours.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the usefulness of that.
Yeah.
So if the pup can realize that, oh, I don't really need to be afraid of that because that thing doesn't exist in my world.
Yeah.
But I have receptors for it.
Yeah, and also like to also look at so perhaps we have developed these sensitivities, shall we say, that are not ours, but they developed as a sensitivity, or perhaps a vigilance. Some people have, some people who have gone through a trauma become hypervigilant, and many of the most intuitive people who can like read other people's minds and read the situation are people who have experienced the most profound trauma in their life, right? And so I think we also need to look at like some of the positives of like maybe kind of also reframe some of this stuff too, right? Not just being a victim to what has happened, but also understanding that we have also certain superpowers as a result of some of the challenges that have happened both to us and our parents and our generations.
Sure.
It really reminds me of, like, for example, the disease sickle cell anemia. People who have sickle cell anemia have a resistance to malaria. So it was a mutation for a resistance to malaria, but it obviously has bad side effects. But it's like that's kind of an interesting thing to think about.
Wow. Yeah, the powers that we have that are a result of different kinds of challenges that we or the previous generations have dealt with.
Yeah.
Different calluses, different strengths. Yeah. Still, though, I think that the attunement for whatever being to be that I am attuned to whatever their pains and whatever freedoms are actually there for me, and that I'm able to tell the difference between those and the ones from my past that I don't need anymore. Right, the ones that are from my past that I don't need anymore, or from my parents that I don't need anymore. If I keep on carrying them, they're gonna take up bandwidth, and make it essentially harder to tell, in the present ones.
Let me get my light because I can't read my notes.
Sure.
Here's my eyes.
Sure. Yeah.
But
this is also hard because
it's kind of faint. I know
it's a little bit, yeah.
My printer was both small.
But I also have I think you sent me.
Oh yeah, right. I just don't want to be on my phone, but yes.
Of course.
Also, my phone's being occupied. One of the things I feel called to move towards in conversation is this idea of I feel like it's really alive. It's boundaries and freedom. The relationship between boundaries and freedom.
Yeah.
And how a lot of times freedom happens within boundaries, or rather boundaries can cultivate freedom.
Oh my God, always.
And like I also think about creativity, and what's interesting is sometimes limitation breeds creativity, and which is really interesting. Like, okay, say you're only gonna have these particular materials to work with. And not all the materials, just these particular materials.
Yeah.
You're gonna be really creative as a result of that.
Yeah.
Or
when the bounds are right for you.
Or like haiku or whatever, right? There's a certain expression that can happen because of certain limitations, which is kind of interesting.
I've experienced that.
Yeah. So I mean, in creativity, there's that. There's also like I just think of like people who are being vulnerable, such as when they're dancing, or when they're singing, or when they're maybe in a music jam or whatever. When there is a container, aka boundaries, people feel more safe to express themselves, and therefore they have more freedom with that, which is an interesting thought. Like, and that's why, like, in my ecstatic dances, I don't want to just have it be just out in the open where there's lots of public and it's super bright and everyone and some random person can just walk through and witness people. I want it to be like a safe container where people can do whatever they want, and it's a safe. And I also think that's why darkness can often, there's magic that happens when the sun goes down when it comes to like drum circles and dancing, and that's because people feel like they can kind of hide a little bit and express themselves more. Plus I think it's an energy change.
Sure.
But these are some examples. Now also this mentality of how you can have greater freedom within boundaries can also be used by certain authoritarian people for negative things, right? It's like,
Sure.
because the flip side of this is very often we give up our freedom in the name of safety.
Sure.
So
we grow
right,
into whatever our fish tank.
So 9/11 happened. People then therefore accepted the Patriot Act that they may not have otherwise accepted, which allows surveillance of citizens and just a lot of limitations that was actually not a good idea. But in the name of safety, we allow certain freedoms to be taken away.
Sure.
So it's once again it's a balance between those two, So yeah.
Priorities.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you're touching an intersection between the hierarchy of needs and safety being towards the bottom of the hierarchy of needs, and the kind of alignment that's necessary there, versus the relationship to endless possibilities.
Yeah.
Right. That how that our needs tell us a lot about who we are, if not most of what we need.
Yeah.
I mean, no pun intended. Everything that we need can be determined by our hierarchy of needs.
Right. So, one thing I'm thinking about with regards to freedom and boundaries, or freedom and safety.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it on a kind of a national and geopolitical and country perspective too, because on the individual it makes more sense. It's like you obviously have freedom when you're in your own house, as opposed to on a public street, because you have the safety and container of your house.
Sure.
Right. But there's also like I think about I'm all about like having government be as unobtrusive as possible, and having as much freedom as possible, freedom of speech, freedom to do whatever you want, But there's two things that I think government is particularly important about, or regulation. There's probably more than just two, but there's two that's coming to my mind right now. One is environmental regulations, right? So I kind of casually, kind of went into environmental law and kind of wanted to understand more about that. And it's like, there's a long history of really big corporations or interests just really basically polluting either the air or the water or the land or the food or whatever in the name of profit, in the name of freedom, right? Freedom. I can do whatever I own this land.
Sure. So
therefore I'm going to smelt copper, and then everyone downwind is going to have major consequences, but in the name of freedom, right? So anyways, that's one example where boundaries and safety is really important, Yeah. The other one is, in our capitalistic society, unfettered capitalism is a problem, where you have monopolies that can happen. And when monopolies happen, then basically, if one entity is like owning the entire economy of gas, then they can jack the prices whatever they want because there's no competition, or whatever else. So antitrust laws are really important so that we have freedom to not be basically under the rule of oligarchs. Of course, oligarchs of the United States is in collusion with the politicians through lobbying and interests anyways, but so certain economic regulations and environmental regulations is important, but then whereas, I don't know, it's just, that's probably getting too out there.
Well, but you're saying
there's an interplay between like the individual and our personal and our micro life and the macro larger lives. Yeah. It's kind of interesting.
Absolutely. No, I love how much you care about these bigger systems, like that you're able to go into like the zooming into the personal and then being able to think about these bigger systems.
Right.
What I see as I think about boundaries and freedom is thinking about in the environment.
Mm-hmm.
What every environment nurtures specific qualities
Mm-hmm.
more than others.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
A certain temperature versus other temperatures.
Totally.
Whatever, right?
Like crime spikes when it gets hotter out, for example.
These different, exactly. And so, being able to be conscious of what the environment is, right? Meaning what the boundaries are. In this particular case, right? You're with the environmental law. You're speaking about a big company that shows interest in being able to produce, way more of something that they're trying to bring into the world.
Yeah.
And they, for whatever reason, whether consciously or unconsciously, they do not think about the impact that they're going to have on the environment, right? They don't think about it.
Right.
And so now the company itself, right? For it to grow, it needs people. If the company does something that kills off a bunch of people because it polluted the water,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to eventually hurt itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so what are, in that case, that big case, now this happens over a lot of time, right? Like the big companies and big groups of people are resilient to being able to like receive that intelligence that's trying to come back. For example, I remember hearing something about how long it took safety belts
Right.
to be enacted into law.
Yeah.
And how many thousands of people died, or tens of thousands, or however many millions. I don't even know. I don't know what the numbers are, but tons of people that died.
Yeah.
Simply because of how long it took. People knew.
Yeah.
How dangerous it was.
Or asbestos, or lead in the gasoline, or
Right.
DDT, or Teflon, as a more contemporary example.
And
But
so,
yeah,
boundaries. But all of those are specific boundaries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and I didn't mean to take it to the macro level. I guess what I'm saying is sometimes the micro does not apply to the macro. If
What do you mean?
Well, what I mean by that is, like, I'm saying we can have greater freedom when we have certain boundaries and safety, basically safety margins or whatever. But then certain governments can use that as, okay, little people, let me make you safe so that you're more free, and then you have North Korea or whatever, in the name of safety, So anyways, I just wanted to like preface that, but really I do want to talk about more of the individual level, and like the individual level is like like you say, being aware of your environment, and not just being aware of your environment, but being intentional about the environment that you're creating, right? And
Absolutely.
And so how can you create certain safeties or boundaries or containers, which is all the same thing, to be more vulnerable, for example, whether that's more vulnerable in conversation or relating or intimacy or whatever. Like, how can you create that, Yeah. I mean, a perfect example of that, I always take it back to this for some reason, but it's like, say you want to be physical with your lover, and you're in a shared house. Because you're not feeling safe, and there's not enough boundaries between your sacred space and other people's space, you're going to feel more constrained and restrained in your expression. Whereas if you have there's more boundary between your space and other people's space, like there's airspace or something, then you're going to feel more free. That's one example. The dancing is another example. Yeah.
This connects to me to the example you were giving of parenting.
Right.
Like how much exposure is too much or too little exposure.
Right.
And these boundaries. Yeah. There's something here about that living relationship, right? Being able to be awake to what it is that something feels like, and the degree that we're actually awake, we're able to tell what kind of environment we need. We're able to tell and notice when we're suddenly around somebody that could be a potential friend, that might be of a different kind of culture, that might welcome the vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Like we need a certain level of sensitivity internally to be able to tell when it shows up. Some kind of an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so there's the need to be able to read it, essentially, right? To be able to read whatever that, to bring people into your life that have that quality.
Yeah, because a good friend or fellow, relationship with another human being, or whatever the relationship that is indeed a container, right? Because the right friend is the kind of person you can express certain sensitivities to, and therefore work things out, which is really a powerful thing. Yeah, just all the different ways that boundaries come into play, whether that's physical space, whether that's trust with another human being, right? Trust with another human being is like, you trust that this person's not going to like turn around on you or like reveal your secrets. So in a sense, they are a literal container that's not leaking. You know what I mean?
Not in ways that you don't want.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and is leaking in ways that you want.
Right, exactly. Totally. So there's human examples of or relationship examples of boundaries. There's physical examples. There's also like agreements, right? So monogamy, right, is a boundary, an agreement that allows a certain amount of freedom within that relationship that you might otherwise have if you didn't have those agreements.
Sure.
Yeah.
One way that I like to think about it is, what does this container, whatever that container, allow me to be free from?
Yeah, good question.
And what does this container allow me to be free to?
Ooh. See, that's juicy right there. Because what a container allows you to be free from can touch on some of those core needs, right? Or those core wounds or core fears or whatever. It touches some core things.
Yeah.
Security. It's interesting perspective,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And so that's, and all the specific liabilities, right? It's kind of like you were sharing the example of an art exploration. If you have too many colors or too many sizes of paper or of whatever it is, it's going to be a challenge to pick one. It's going to be a challenge for some people.
Yeah.
For somebody else, it might be a marvelous experience.
Right. I mean, some people will probably have a greater tolerance for. Okay. Well, one thing I'm thinking about too, with regards to the restriction and creativity, is also like just organization. It's like if you're in a more clear, uncluttered space, I believe, in my opinion, are going to be more creative and more insightful than in a cluttered place. Or if you're going to like cook a dinner. Obviously, it's going to go a lot easier if everything is clean and everything is put away. Everything where it is. It's going to go a lot more smoothly than had it been a more cluttered, disorganized kitchen. And so that organization, that tidiness, is once again another form of a boundary.
Container.
And it's literally things are in containers, right? Or storage areas or whatever. So it reminds me of something. It was in the book Getting Things Done, and it's the concept of you can have everything you want. It was especially with regards to like paperwork, but really I can relate to anything as long as it's in the right place. Does it have a home? Because that's what happens in a lot of clutter. Is like things don't actually have a home.
I actually have that experience with my paperwork. I don't have that much paperwork in my life, but the paperwork that I have doesn't really. I mean, some has a home, but it's not particularly well built.
Right. So, anyways, this is kind of an interesting thought of like, what is home? What is home? Do things have home?
Exactly.
Do things have the right place? And you know what also that means? There's another thing we talked about too in the past, which is the right order of things is important.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you can do the right things, but if they're not in the right order, then it's actually not the right thing. And
Absolutely.
so the hierarchy or the order or the chronological order of things is a certain way of placing things.
Sure.
That's important, and to realize that is it in the right place?
Yeah.
Like say for example, in the evolution of a relationship, there's certain chronological steps that are needed. So people can potentially skip certain steps that might be really important in the evolution of a relationship.
Yeah.
So things were in the right place with regards to time.
Yeah.
So time and space with regards to home.
With regards to exactly the usefulness of the information that is useful for the next date. For an actual stable growth.
Yeah.
Rather than a proclivity to make kinds of commitments or deviations.
Now, the other thing I can imagine, though, is some people, in listening to this, will say, well, but in the state of chaos is incredible power. Because there's also, I think, truth to that is like, it's like, there's also something very fertile, not just about order, but also about chaos. The other thing I can imagine, though, is some people, in listening to this, will say, well, but in the state of chaos is incredible power. Because there's also, I think, truth to that is like, it's like, there's also something very fertile, not just about order, but also about chaos. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that any home, which is an interesting idea, but see, I liked when you were saying, what's the word that you use? Well, just bringing the word home.
Yeah.
Home should nurture freedom.
Right.
And that means that at different times in our development, that when I'm 5, being free means something, and when I'm 15, it means something very different. And so being able to be tuned to whatever those boundaries are, those containers, can help really protect. And that speaks to the order, like having things in order. That sometimes something's necessary and sometimes something else is necessary. But these different boundaries that clearly provide the opportunity for actual freedom. But even for a 5-year-old, right, chaos, the chaos that a 5-year-old can withstand, right, and actually play inside of, probably doesn't include weeks on end without any adults. Right,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Well, so and then there's this. So as I was thinking about this idea of order and chaos, which seem like polar things.
Sure.
You also have a relationship. I'm thinking about certain people I know, and actually a part of myself, that finds a lot of power in the chaos and order, but there's also part of me that gets power in chaos. And another word for chaos, I think, or something I'm actually more relating to, is wildness. Right? Like
that's interesting.
Wildness. And well, when I think about wildness, I think about drumming, or music, or playing piano.
Yeah. So that's the intersection.
Yeah.
Of a certain amount of chaos, but a certain type of boundary, right? In any of those.
Yeah. I guess that's true. That's true. Like when I think about music, I think I could do the things, the piano, that I know work.
Yeah.
And I could approach it from a logical perspective, or just approach it from like, what do I think other people will like to hear? But it's gonna feel constrained. But when I don't care, and when I am wild with regards to piano, and I don't care about what I've ever done in the past and whatever, that's when the magic happens. In the wildness of it.
Interesting. But I think that you're talking about Are you not then describing that when you play piano, I don't know how often you experience this state, but that the times that you do not experience that state, that you are too bridled, that you are too restrained?
Sure.
And that in those moments, you're actually coming into a good balance between chaos and order.
Right, because there is an edge, right?
If you go further,
because it's actually a very sharp edge in playing piano, for example, in that wild state where it could devolve if I go over a little bit too far over this way into something that sounds really not good.
Exactly.
Because,
but that's important to be able to do that. But to be close to that edge.
Yeah, to be close to that edge, exactly. And I'm also reminded of the hypnagogic state, which I always love to talk about. You know, the state between wakefulness and sleep. And that's when like different parts of the mind are speaking to each other that are normally siloed, and then you have really some wild visions and ideas and insight and poetry that can happen in that state of hypnagogia or hypnagogic state. So that's also kind of a wildness too, because there's a little bit of disorder in the mind, which is allowing it to like really access really some wild things. I mean,
so that's an element of chaos,
and the dream state too, which can be incredibly insightful and profound and wise, also has an incredible amount of wildness in it.
Sure.
Like you're believing things that should not be real, you know, in your dreams. So
exactly.
Yeah, so it's just once again there's this balance.
Yeah.
And I also think it's balance with regards to like everything in life, you know? Because I mean also, you hear a lot of people say it's all about being in the present moment, it's all about being in the present moment, and it's true. Like we often are not in the present moment enough. And that is really ultimately the only thing that exists. And I can talk a lot about the present moment, boy I could. But for a person who's part of the brain cannot register or retain information or think about the future, and they only live in the present, are they really living the best life? Living only in the present? Are they really fulfilled? No, I don't think so. So it's a balance of being able to like be somewhere else that is not the present, and also being able to be in the present.
Right. Like the difference between a dog.
Yeah. Another example, which we talked about, is the dichotomy between logic and feeling state, the masculine and the feminine.
Yeah. Somebody
who's entirely logical is going to have a problem. Somebody who's entirely feeling is also going to have a problem.
Yeah.
Once again, it's about the balance of those, you know?
Exactly.
So
that's where the magic
is. So when it comes to this, like, freedom and boundaries and also order versus chaos or wildness, is finding that balance, you know? And, the same thing goes with, like, natural medicine versus allopathic medicine. Oftentimes, allopathic people are like, oh, herbal medicine is dangerous and quack. And then the people who are more into natural medicine are like, never, ever trust a doctor, an allopathic doctor. But really, there's a middle way, you know? Like, there is incredible wisdom and intelligence on both sides. That's one reason why I like Stephen Buhner a lot. Is because he approached herbalism from both the really intuitive, like plants have spirits kind of perspective, and had a very excellent grasp on the actual academic literature on all of this, and the mechanisms of action and things like that. I love the combination of those two things.
That sounds like the feminine and the masculine coming together.
Right.
In one place.
Yeah.
Sounds beautiful.
And also, in talking about touching the invisible parts, did I refill my water?
Can I get water from there?
I think it's not.
Is it empty?
It's empty.
It's okay.
I could, yeah.
It's okay.
Or just anything. Can I give you this?
Sure.
It's just unflavored.
That's great.
Would you like anything with it?
No.
Okay.
That's great.
Sorry about that.
No, it's good.
But
they say that the sparkles are actually good for certain things. I don't. Yeah, anyways, go ahead.
So, taking it back once again to the root of our conversation, which is the nonverbal things and touching these deep, basically touching the deep parts of ourselves. A word came into my dream state recently. It's a word I've never used before, and I had to look it up. You told me to look it up because it sounded like German. Hinterland.
Oh yeah.
Hinterland, and so hinterland is land that is beyond the visible.
Mm-hmm.
So it reminds me of our subconscious, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways,
Mm-hmm.
so in dealing with this, like, it is once again an interplay between these embodied nonverbal ways of touching it, and also being able to express it too, you know, and being able to, you know, find the metaphors and stories of understanding. I think to tie it together, to tie in that feeling versus logical thing, so it comes together. Mm-hmm. Like a lot of times, you know, I will admit, I tend to explore things from, I lean intellectual, right, as opposed to like the feeling realm. You know, I lean, though I definitely, you know, am acquainted well with the feeling realm, but I lean intellectual. So a lot of times what I'll do is, say there's this thing, whatever this thing is, that I'm trying to understand in my life. What I often will do, and it can take me time, is to just fucking expand it. And look at it from all, like, look at the thing from all the different perspectives and take it apart and nuance it and read and relate it to certain things I'm reading or certain people I'm probably talking with, and just, like, basically write effectively a book. And then what I do is I collapse it into a singularity of elegant understanding, to a nugget. So I allow it to expand, and then I collapse it, you know.
Excellent.
And in the
That's
process, it is right. And so it's
rather
like
than just taking a word like tree, you go and then you study all the types of trees.
Right. I make a monograph of the tree.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that's a tree. Well, I understand a tree, and then I make a monograph of it, and then I title the monograph "Tree." So I mean, it's kind of it's you know, that's just once again. You say some of the things that have worked for you may not work for other people. That's something like that process probably works for me just because I lean that way, you know. But anyways, like
it seems like you value, and I value, but and I do it in different ways. But you value the realness, real relationship. You want to get to know reality for what's actually happening as much as you can.
What's the depth? What's the core? What's the things that have not been spoken about?
Yeah.
What are the mechanisms that's happening? Why is this? What are the what's you know? It's like looking at a pyramid, and it's like, okay, here's the top part that you're visually seeing, and there's the obvious part, but what's supporting that? You know, what's supporting that pinnacle?
Yeah. Understanding how it works.
And then, you know, the other thing is, like, to understand some of these really difficult, ephemeral, wild concepts, such as maybe interconnection or afterlife or divine connection or whatever, you have to use metaphor and story, because that's the only way to explain it. You know, it's like when you use words, that is. I don't know. So, anyways, that's the other thing I think we've talked about too is the concept of elegance. Elegance meaning what is the most you know, Einstein says, to paraphrase, if you have a set of theories, the one that's most simple is the one that's going to be true. Right? So it's like whenever I try to find a way to explain something, and that's usually when I try to collapse it to a singularity, I try to collapse it into an elegant understanding of nugget. You know, anyways, so
it resolves
elegance.
Something with the least amount of energy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Or least amount of words, or least amount of process, whatever. What's the most direct?
Yeah.
You know?
And it's also it's beauty. I think it connects to the concept of beauty. And that beauty, I believe that beauty heals. Yeah. And part of why beauty heals is because it demonstrates that the masculine and the feminine can indeed coexist.
All right.
Can indeed make love.
Yeah. Beauty heals. I like that. Well, and that's a conversation I've had over years, is what is beauty? Because what you're talking about is not aesthetic beauty, I presume. Though it can include aesthetic beauty, there's something beyond that, I presume, is what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, in some ways, it is the simultaneous. This, and I got this definition from a source called Lazarus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I may be, I'm not going to say it verbatim.
Sure.
But it is the simultaneous presence of masculine and feminine in something, in a way that both the masculine and the feminine are harmonious.
God, that's so good.
See,
that was an elegant definition of beauty.
Yeah.
Not just because it was simple, but because it was profound, too. It was profound in its simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And so you have examples of... Lazarus gives examples of... one example is when you experience joy, which is a powerful masculine experience of, when you really enjoy.
Sure.
It is this vertical, like a joyride, or something where you're beaming,
Sure.
Joy
is very like outward.
Very.
It's a very expressive, outward,
like
transmissive kind of thing.
Not just contentment or happiness, but joy. That's like really powerful in that way. And peace.
And peace is more of like just inward receptive.
Well, it's
kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's also about the interconnectivity. Right. Peace is about there's like harmony here in this aliveness, whatever this aliveness between us.
Yeah.
There's enough harmony that includes our differences, right? That it feels like it's the order. It's like there's order that's still, even though there's aliveness, right, which is not necessarily predetermined order, but there's enough order at the same time. There's like something peaceful here that's about the ambiance. It's about the womb that we're in. It's about the state of being rather than doing. That is, and so when you have moments in which you can experience that you presence or you experience joy and peace at the same time, that's an example of beauty.
Oh boy, oh my God, there's so many different things that can be said about that. I'm listening to a book about organizing, space organizing, and
space organizing.
It's organizing your possessions and your stuff.
Wow, that sounds really interesting.
It's really great. I forgot the name of it, but anyways, it's like the Japanese art of organizing or something like that. But she's like, you take every object you own.
Oh.
You hold it.
What's her name?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
And you ask yourself, does this give me joy?
Yeah.
And if it does not give you joy, then you get rid of it. You know? And then in so doing this process of finding what gives you joy, you find as a result deep peace as a result of having your space organized. You know? And having a breathing space, you know?
Oh, wow, so making a space beautiful.
Yeah, making a space beautiful. Right. I'm still working on it. But
I like a lot
process.
of things here. Yeah.
But anyways, like so there's this combination
Contrast.
of joy, peace, masculine, feminine. That's what equals beauty.
There's another element here that is connected.
Yeah.
That is an element that is in beauty. I think my sense is that I believe that I also believe I heard from this same entity is that in the places where the masculine and the feminine are able to simultaneously cohabit, they one thing that happens or that is presenced is it's like a moment or an instance of eternity. But there's like a feeling or an essence when you see something that's really beautiful. That there's a sense of connecting to something eternal.
Yeah, something that's timeless.
Yeah.
That's something that I reference all these different references. So Walt Whitman said, in the process of his writing and how to be a good writer, is what you write about should not lose its potency or go out of date if in 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 years some new technology is invented or some revelation about the essence of the universe is figured out. Like, fundamentally, the writing, if it's good writing, is timeless. Right?
I like that.
So, like, Whitman, Emerson, and Thoreau, and Lao Tzu and Tao Te Ching and other very, like, powerful books continue to be powerful because they are written in a way that is eternal, timeless, right? So, yeah, and you know, so also what you're talking about in this concept of beauty, is the concept of wholeness or completeness. And it also reminds me of, like, a really well-composed meal has a good balance of all 5 flavors. You know? It has, you know, it has all the different flavors. You know, a piece of art is pleasing and beautiful when it has a balance of, like, focal point and space. You know? Sculpture is like that too, where there's negative space and positive space. I believe, like, one of the things I think about a lot too is, like, I love all seasons. I genuinely do. I like living in a temperate area where I get to experience all 4 seasons. And I think when people go away for the winter, there's something. It's okay to, like, go away for a vacation, but for the whole winter, right? It's like you're not having a whole relationship with the land that you're being in. Like, it's like you're missing the bitter in the food. And don't get me wrong, bitter is associated with both medicine and poison. And because it's associated with poison, we tend to just avoid the bitter. But there's a lot of power in medicine and wholeness within including the bitter in our world. And I also think that with regards to winter and everything that winter symbolizes too. You know, because winter, at least from this perspective of, you know, Chinese medicine, is very a very feminine, you know, time of year. You know, feminine, or the yin, is considered dark, wet, cold, receptive, inward, right? That's what yin is. And I think that's just important to have that balance. You know, I've had this conversation.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with Melissa, and she also mentioned how, like, people who live in tropical environments where it is consistent the whole time, they're really chill and laid back. They tend to be, right? Whereas people who live in more temperate climates, they're, like, fucking active in summer. You know, they're like doing things because they have to, because then in winter they kind of have to go inward a little bit. You know. Interesting. And so the tropical people have achieved their balance of yin by taking a more chill approach to things, kind of pacing themselves a little bit better. So that's kind of an interesting perspective too, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Anyways, so yeah, this idea of beauty being wholeness.
Well, it seems like wholeness is a feminine trait, no?
Is it? Or is it?
I don't know.
Maybe.
I sense it because when I think of wholeness, I think of an awareness that makes it possible to notice when there is a coherence, when there is a completeness, when there is a...
What?
Go ahead.
Well, as you're saying wholeness, being related to the feminine, you're doing this. And I feel like wholeness is... There's a sense of, like, talk about shapes, right? There's a sense of, like...
Container?
A container, and that is very feminine. It's like, I think about, like, a cell, the membrane of a cell, and within that cell is indeed a wholeness. That cell is whole. But then, you also have wholeness in the context of what is outer and what is outside of this.
Sure.
You know?
And the masculine that provides the boundary.
Yeah. Like, you know, you have the intracellular space and you have the extracellular space. Right? And so there's a wholeness. So like, I think there's a masculine wholeness, and then there's a feminine wholeness, and then there's a unity of both wholenesses.
That's interesting.
Just a thought, you know. I mean, I think of the yin yang symbol.
Yeah.
Where the black side has a wholeness because it still has the feminine in it, and then the white side has a wholeness because it still has the darkness in it. So, yeah.
As you say that, I'm still finding myself leaning towards thinking that it's feminine because it seems like you're naming a quality that
I can see
we can't escape. That it's just kind of like we're always inside of it.
Well, you could also look at masculine being reductionist or partial.
Sure.
Or categorized.
Yeah.
Whereas the feminine is not partial, rather whole, not categorized, but encompassing. And yeah.
I like those words.
Not reductionistic either, but rather holistic. Yeah. So I see what you mean there.
But I like what you're saying about. I like thinking about it as masculine wholeness.
Masculine wholeness. Ooh, that's a brand name right there.
Yeah, it has some kind of power behind it.
But you know, it reminds me of the Tao Te Ching, which I love, and a lot of the passages contradict each other. But the contradiction of each other does not negate the truth.
No.
So one example is in one passage it says, "Take care of things when they are small before they become a bigger thing." Right? So, you know, an example of that is if there's an ember that's starting to be a fire, step it out fast before it's a wildfire. Right? But then there's another passage that says you have to allow things to expand before they can collapse. You have to allow yourself to be broken in order to be whole, to be crooked before you can be straight. Right? Anyways, so this idea of expanding and then going back down is contrary to stamping it out before it becomes something bigger.
Right.
Both of these things are true. So this concept of feminine representing wholeness, and also there also being a form of masculine wholeness, feminine wholeness, and wholeness are both simultaneous truths.
So it seems like you're talking about paradox.
Paradox. We live in a world of paradox. If only all of the polar opinions in this world would realize that paradox is the truth of our reality. You know?
I once had a teacher say something about that if you can find the space between the two.
Yeah, exactly.
There's power there.
Yeah. So our friend Cam, he's into imago therapy.
Oh yeah.
You know, this concept of imago, and I mean he has a lot of really good ideas on that concept. I mean, one of them is instead of trying to find wholeness before you get in a relationship, right? Like I got to make myself right before I get in a relationship. Rather, in imago, that's cognitive behavioral therapy perspective. In imago therapy, it's you find wholeness through relating to others. That's how you heal, is through relationship. So that was interesting. But the other thing in imago therapy is like when you with another person are having a contradictory opinion, you don't necessarily have to agree with the other person, but you realize that like you try it on. You reflect back, of course. That's classic, empathy of like you reflect back what they're saying, maybe in even better words than they're even saying it.
Sure.
You know,
maybe including the feelings that you felt in the nonverbal.
Yeah, like a lot of times I'll like debate on people's behalf that I don't even agree with their opinion. We're like, well, here's a great metaphor for you to use, even though I don't agree with what you're saying. You know, but like.
I like that. That's steel manning instead of straw manning. Yeah.
So I mean, and that's in debate. Like if you take debate classes, you have to debate both sides.
Yeah.
Like you go up and you debate this side, and then you go up again and you debate the other side. You know, so I think that's really useful. But
That's so healthy.
anyways, the idea is like, and the way I've used the metaphor in understanding that is like, you know, I'm seeing a circle and you're seeing a rectangle. And I can say all day, this is a fucking circle. And but I'm right. It's true. It's a circle. And you're right. It's a rectangle. And so the combination of those two seemingly contradictory opinions make the actual
The
truth.
whole. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So you know, when another person is having a seemingly contradictory opinion to me, I'm like, where's the union of our seemingly contradictory opinions?
Yeah. That sometimes it is best to treat it as a rectangle, and sometimes it is best to treat it as a circle.
Yeah.
And in the way of sometimes personal responsibility before jumping into a relationship is really powerful. Like it's really helpful when you do your own work before you go in.
Right.
And some
Totally.
other times,
Totally.
oh my God, go into the relationship.
Yeah.
Bathe, drench yourself in the relationship, and you
Yeah.
will learn tremendous. And,
Right.
But it's not either.
Right.
Do both.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, in community there was this archetypal debate between different camps of let's grow and make this community expand and get into new projects and start new things and that excitement of newness and growth. And then you have the other camp who's like, well, let's finish what we have and to maintain the assets that we currently have. Well, it's ultimately both. You know?
Sure.
But then what happens so often with people is they get stuck in their mentality thinking that their way is the right way in contradiction to the other way. You know?
That's the opposite of what we're talking about.
That is the opposite, but that's unfortunately what happens for so many people.
Sure.
Sure.
Well, we all have, specifically in the places where we're not open to allowing the intelligence of the nonverbal to come up.
Yeah.
We usually attach ourselves very intensely to a certain way of being.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one of my other interests is cults and mind control. God, I love that topic.
Yeah.
Oops. My phone died. That sucks. But
well, it's also probably time.
It is probably time. Well, I hope you enjoyed this extended video podcast with Adrian and I. If you're interested in more videos like this, like it, subscribe, and write a comment below. And I hope you enjoy the explorations of understanding both your inner world and your outer world and finding coherence in your life.